When Donald Trump mocked Barack Obama's Harvard law degree, the room burst into laughter, but what happened next would silence the crowd and leave Trump struggling to catch his breath. It happened in a packed convention hall in Phoenix, Arizona, where the air was already thick with a tension you could almost taste, a volatile mix of stale air conditioning and simmering anticipation. Before Donald Trump even touched the microphone, the atmosphere was electric, charged with the promise of conflict. It was less a political rally and more a gladiatorial arena under fluorescent lights, and the audience was hungry for a fight. Cameras panned across the crowd, revealing a nation divided in miniature. On one side, a sea of crimson hats bobbed in unison, their wearers' faces etched with a fierce, unwavering devotion. They were the faithful, an army ready for their commander's call to arms, their cheers already a low rumble waiting to erupt. On the other side sat the curious, the skeptical, and the opposed. There were college students with phones held high, ready to broadcast history, seasoned political junkies who came for the sheer spectacle of it all, and a handful of local residents who simply wanted to see the phenomenon for themselves. But everyone in that sweltering hall, regardless of their allegiance, knew one thing for certain. This wasn't going to be an ordinary night. Then he emerged. With that familiar mix of confidence and bravado that had defined his public persona for decades, Donald Trump strode to the center of the stage. He didn't just walk to the podium. He claimed it, planting his hands firmly on its sides as if conquering a new territory. He let the initial wave of applause wash over him, a baptism in adoration, scanning the faces in the front row with a conspiratorial grin. He was a master of this domain, a conductor of chaos who knew precisely how to orchestrate the emotions of a crowd. He let the cheers build, soaking in the energy, before leaning into the microphone with a showman's perfect timing. "You know," he began, his voice a low growl that instantly silenced the murmurs, "we have a former president here tonight, a man they say is brilliant." He paused, letting the sarcasm drip from each word. The crowd leaned in, a collective intake of breath. They knew the hunt was on. "They talk about his Harvard law degree like it's some sacred text," he scoffed, a sharp, dismissive sound that sent a ripple of amusement through his supporters. He shook his head, looking out at them as if sharing an inside joke. Then he delivered the line that would ignite the entire evening, each word sharpened to a razor's edge. "Barack Obama, Harvard law degree. Give me a break. The man probably never even deserved it." For a moment there was a stunned beat of silence, and then the room detonated. The laughter wasn't just a sound, it was a physical force. It erupted from the front rows and rolled backward in a tidal wave of derision, crashing against the far walls of the convention hall. It was a raw, guttural, and deeply partisan roar, the kind of laughter that doesn't just mock a person but validates the mocker. Men in red caps slapped their knees, their faces contorted in glee. A woman pointed toward the stage, her laughter so intense it was silent, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably. For a brief, intoxicating moment, Trump was a king on his throne, a comedian who had just landed the perfect joke at his rival's expense. He bathed in the sound, spreading his arms wide as if to embrace the glorious chaos he had unleashed. His grin was triumphant, his eyes darting toward the cameras to ensure the world was capturing his victory. But then, the director in the production truck made a fateful decision. Instead of lingering on Trump's smug celebration, the main camera cut away. It panned slowly, deliberately to the side of the stage, and there stood Barack Obama. He wasn't reacting. He wasn't scowling. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't shifting his weight. He simply stood, hands clasped loosely in front of him, a portrait of unnerving stillness. The laughter was a storm raging around him, yet he was the eye of it, an island of profound, unshakable calm. It wasn't the composure of someone who was defeated. It was the eerie tranquility of someone who was waiting, the kind of silence that precedes a storm. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tide of laughter began to recede. The loudest guffaws in the front row sputtered out, replaced by nervous coughs. The knee-slapping stopped. People began to exchange uncertain glances. Why wasn't he reacting? Why didn't he look angry? A young journalist in the press pit whispered into her recorder, "He's not giving him anything. It's like he's letting Trump's insult just die in the air." The atmosphere in the hall began to shift. The gleeful energy curdled into a tense, buzzing anticipation. The crowd was no longer watching a comedian. They were watching a predator who had just poked a sleeping lion. And the lion was beginning to stir. The silence that followed the laughter was heavier, more meaningful than the noise itself. In that quiet, a single collective thought rippled through the hall. Trump may have started this, but Obama was about to finish it. Obama's movement was so subtle it was almost imperceptible. He took a single deliberate step toward his own microphone, his hand brushing the stand lightly, a gesture not of nervousness but of taking control. The entire hall held its breath. The silence was now absolute, a vacuum waiting to be filled. When he spoke, his voice was not loud, not angry, not even forceful. It was measured, conversational, yet it cut through the thick air with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "You know, Donald," he began, a faint, almost imperceptible hint of amusement in his tone, "I've heard a lot of strange things over the years. But doubting my Harvard law degree, that's a new one." The delivery was masterful. It wasn't defensive. It was curious. It didn't punch back. It parried, turning Trump's brute force back on itself. The crowd, which seconds ago had been roaring with laughter, was now utterly captivated. Trump himself shifted on his feet, his triumphant smirk faltering for the first time. The joke was over. A different kind of performance had begun. A dozen emotions flickered across the faces in the audience. Embarrassment from those who had laughed the loudest, intrigue from the neutral observers, and a surge of hope from Obama's supporters. Obama let the silence hang for another beat before continuing, his voice still calm, almost casual, but with an underlying steel that was impossible to miss. "I worked hard for that degree," he said, looking not at Trump, but out at the vast audience, addressing each person individually. "I didn't buy it. I didn't pretend to earn it. I didn't inherit it." Every phrase was a quiet, targeted shot, dismantling the very foundation of Trump's persona. "I studied. I taught. I spent nights in the library while most people were asleep." He paused, letting the image sink in. The image of effort, of sacrifice, of intellectual grit. It was a world away from gold-plated towers and reality television. "And if you think that's something to laugh at," he concluded, finally turning his gaze to Trump, "well, that says a lot more about you than it does about me." A wave of gasps and murmurs swept through the hall. It wasn't applause yet, but it was the next best thing. A collective realization that the tables had just been turned. Trump forced a chuckle, trying to wave it off, but the energy had fundamentally shifted. The moment of mockery was over. The lesson had just begun. Trump, sensing the ground shifting beneath him, knew he couldn't win a battle of intellect or composure. That wasn't his arena. His power lay in disruption, in turning his opponent's strengths into weaknesses. He grabbed his microphone, his knuckles white, and tried to wrestle control back with the tool he wielded best: populist outrage. "Oh, come on," he boomed, shaking his head with exaggerated disbelief. "Don't give me the sob story about the library. We all know how it works." He pointed a finger not at Obama but at the crowd, making them his co-conspirators once more. "People get pushed through Harvard all the time. Political connections, special treatment. You know how the game is rigged." He was trying to reframe the narrative. Obama's degree wasn't a symbol of hard work. It was a mark of the elite, the establishment, the very system his supporters felt had left them behind. A smattering of cheers erupted from his base, a desperate attempt to reignite the fire he had started. "I didn't need Harvard," Trump declared, puffing out his chest. "I went out into the real world. I built skyscrapers. I created jobs. I made billions with my own two hands. Not by sitting in a dusty library reading books written by a bunch of professors who never built a thing in their lives." The line was classic Trump. A direct assault on intellectualism in favor of tangible, physical, and monetary success. He was casting himself as the champion of the common man, the doer versus the thinker, the builder versus the talker. In the third row, a man in a Dallas Cowboys cap who had been laughing moments before now nodded in agreement, muttering to his friend, "He's got a point. What did a law degree ever do for me?" Trump smirked, feeling a sliver of his momentum return. He leaned into his mic and fired his next volley directly at Obama. "You think you're better than everybody else because of a piece of paper from some fancy school? Let me tell you, that piece of paper doesn't put food on the table for the people in this room. It doesn't protect our borders. It doesn't make America strong. Action does that. And I'm a man of action." The cheers grew a little louder, a little more confident. He had thrown down the gauntlet, creating a clear and simple choice for the audience. Who do you trust? The elite academic with his fancy words, or the powerful businessman with his golden towers? Obama listened patiently, his expression unreadable. He let Trump's populist tirade fill the hall, letting the cheers for action and billions echo and then fade. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush. He simply absorbed the attack, and when the room quieted once more, he stepped forward not to defend himself, but to change the entire battlefield. His voice, when he spoke, was softer, imbued with a gravity that demanded attention. "Donald, when you try to tear down education," he said, his gaze sweeping across the entire hall, "you're not just talking about me. You're not just talking about Harvard." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "You're talking about every kid out there who dreams of being the first in their family to graduate from college." The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. This was no longer a personal spat between two powerful men. Obama was widening the lens, transforming Trump's personal insult into a collective one. He was making it about them, the audience. "You're talking about every single parent who works a second job so their child can have a better future. You're talking about every community college student who stays up all night studying, hoping that hard work might finally change their life." A smattering of applause broke out near the back. It was hesitant at first, but it was genuine. It wasn't the roaring approval of a rally. It was the sharp, percussive sound of recognition. A college student named Angela, who was live streaming to her friends in Tucson, whispered into her phone, "Oh my God, he just flipped the entire script. You can feel the energy changing in here." Obama pressed his advantage, his voice rising slightly with controlled passion. "You can try to laugh at me. That's fine. I've been dealing with that my whole life. But when you laugh at education, you laugh at them. You laugh at the American dream itself. The idea that it doesn't matter where you come from, it matters where you're going. The idea that with enough grit and determination, you can build a life based on what you know, not just who you know." The applause grew, spreading from the back of the hall to the sides. People who had remained silent were now clapping, their faces a mixture of surprise and admiration. Trump tried to cut in, dismissively waving his hand. Typical politician, trying to make it about everybody else. But his voice was partially drowned out. The audience was no longer just watching a debate. They were being asked to choose a side, not between two men, but between two fundamental values: the cynical dismissal of knowledge versus the hopeful pursuit of it. The hall was buzzing, a low hum of chatter and shifting loyalties. Trump's attack had been blunted, but Obama knew he needed to do more than just defend the idea of education. He needed to land a blow that was both personal and irrefutable. He held up a hand to quiet the nascent applause, his expression turning from broad principle to sharp, specific fact. "Donald, I didn't just attend Harvard," he said, his voice dropping to a near-confidential tone, forcing everyone to lean in to hear. "I didn't just graduate. I was elected president of the Harvard Law Review." The statement landed with the force of a physical impact. A wave of gasps rippled through the audience. Even for those who didn't fully grasp the significance, the title itself sounded monumental. It carried an undeniable weight, an authority that couldn't be dismissed as a handout. Obama immediately explained why it mattered, preempting any attempt by Trump to belittle it. "That doesn't happen because of your name. It doesn't happen because of political connections. It's a position you are elected to by your peers, some of the most competitive, critical, and brilliant legal minds in the country. It happens for one reason, and one reason only, because you earn their respect. You earn it through the quality of your arguments, the rigor of your logic, and your ability to lead." He was holding up a receipt. It was a quantifiable, verifiable achievement, a testament to meritocracy that directly contradicted Trump's narrative of a rigged system. Across the audience, a group of college students whooped with delight, their voices sparking another, more confident round of applause. A veteran in the front row, who had been listening with a skeptical arms-crossed posture, slowly unfolded his arms and gave a single, decisive nod. Trump, for the first time, looked genuinely thrown. He scoffed, trying to regain his footing. "Law review, big deal. Who even reads those things? Nobody. Nobody cares." People care about action, not paperwork. But the dismissal sounded weak, defensive. He was trying to tear down a mountain with a shovel. Obama didn't even glance at him. He kept his focus on the audience. "Do you know why the Harvard Law Review matters?" he asked, his tone shifting to that of a professor engaging his class. "Because it's where you learn the discipline to test ideas, to defend them with facts, not just with volume. It's where you learn to understand both sides of an issue before reaching a conclusion." I carried that discipline into the classroom when I taught constitutional law. I carried it into the U.S. Senate, and I carried it into the Oval Office. The applause that followed was no longer hesitant. It was a powerful, rolling affirmation. He hadn't just defended his degree, he had defined it as the very foundation of his leadership. The momentum was now firmly on Obama's side. He had established his credentials not as a mark of elitism, but as a badge of hard-won merit. Now he moved in to draw the ultimate contrast, a moral line in the sand that would separate their two philosophies of life: success and legacy. "You keep telling people you built things." "Donald," Obama said, his tone now almost gentle, as if explaining a simple concept to a child. "And that's fine. You built towers. Nobody is taking that away from you." He paused, letting the concession hang in the air, a show of magnanimity that only served to sharpen what came next. "But here's the fundamental difference between you and me." The hall fell silent again. Every eye was locked on him. "You built buildings with other people's money," he stated, a simple fact delivered without malice. "I built a career with my own hard work." The first contrast was drawn. He continued, his voice gaining strength. "You put your name in gold letters on glass and steel. I put my time into teaching young people how the law works, so they could go out and fight for justice and fairness for others." The second contrast landed even harder. Then he delivered the summary, a line that crystallized the entire debate into a single, powerful dichotomy. "One of us is leaving behind something that lasts. The other is leaving behind logos on real estate." The crowd erupted. It was a visceral, emotional roar of approval. Cheers echoed off the high ceilings as a wave of people surged to their feet, clapping furiously. It was no longer just about a degree. It was about purpose. It was about the meaning of a life's work. A group of teachers sitting in the middle section were on their feet, their applause ringing out with a personal, heartfelt conviction. Someone shouted, "Tell him!" drawing a fresh wave of cheers. Trump's face was a mask of fury. His jaw tightened as he gripped the podium, leaning forward to shout over the noise. "Wrong! Totally wrong! I made America stronger. I did more than anybody. More jobs, more money. Harvard didn't do that." But his words were swallowed by the tidal wave of applause. His timing, once so impeccable, was now hopelessly off. He was shouting into a hurricane of his opponent's making. Obama let the moment breathe, his composure a stark counterpoint to Trump's flailing anger. Then he added the final nail, his voice cutting through the din. "Your name on a building doesn't teach a child how to read, Donald. It doesn't give a factory worker health care. It doesn't strengthen the Constitution that keeps us all free. Those are the things that education, that law, that service, actually do." The applause was now deafening. Trump had built his brand on being a builder. In a few masterfully crafted sentences, Obama had reframed him as something far less noble. Just a brand. The air was electric, thick with the aftermath of the crowd's ovation. Trump, visibly cornered, decided to go for broke. He abandoned nuance and went straight for a raw, personal attack, his voice laced with venom. "You talk about the Constitution, but you couldn't even fix the country. You're all talk, Barack, all talk. People like me, we don't need papers to prove anything. We prove it with action. Obama didn't hesitate. He saw the opening Trump had created and stepped right through it. His expression remained steady, but his eyes held a new intensity. The time for parrying was over. This was the counterpunch. "Donald," he began, his voice dropping, forcing the raucous crowd into a sudden, attentive silence. "If action means bankrupting companies, leaving your workers unpaid, and inflating your wealth while others suffer." A collective gasp swept through the hall. He had gone there. He had brought up the single most controversial aspect of Trump's business career. The air crackled. This was no longer a debate about ideas. It was an indictment. "Then maybe we should thank God you didn't have a law degree," Obama finished, his voice calm but the words landing like a battering ram. "Because with that kind of education, you might have done even more damage." The room exploded. It was a detonation of shock, outrage, and cathartic release. People leaped to their feet, clapping, cheering, whistling. The sound was a physical wall, so loud it seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. A woman in the front row covered her mouth in disbelief, her eyes wide. A young man laughed uncontrollably, shaking his head as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. The moderators looked at each other, stunned, their carefully planned schedule now utterly irrelevant. This was history, raw and unfiltered. Trump's face turned crimson. He jabbed a finger furiously at Obama, shouting over the pandemonium. "Lies, fake news, total lies. You don't know what you're talking about." But his words were just pebbles thrown against a tidal wave. The audience wasn't listening to him anymore. They were roaring their approval for the man who had just used Trump's own history, his action, his success, as the ultimate weapon against him. Obama didn't gloat. He didn't pump his fist. He simply stepped back from the microphone, folded his hands, and let the moment stand on its own. The confidence wasn't in overpowering his opponent. It was in knowing he had just spoken an undeniable truth. A reporter for the Arizona Republic frantically typed into his laptop, his whispered words forming the headline that would dominate the next day. "Obama weaponizes Trump's business past in stunning takedown." The fight was, for all intents and purposes, over. All that was left was the final word. The ovation finally began to subside, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. The energy in the hall was completely transformed. The initial mockery felt like a distant memory from another lifetime. Now the room was a courtroom, and the verdict had been delivered. Trump stood at his podium, tight-lipped and visibly seething, searching for a comeback that wasn't there. The rhythm he thrived on, the call and response, the escalating chants, had been shattered. Obama stepped forward one last time. He wasn't addressing Trump anymore. He was addressing the audience, the cameras, and the country watching at home. He was delivering the closing argument, the moral of the story he had just woven. His voice was quiet, almost reflective, yet every syllable carried the weight of the entire evening. "You can call books weak," he began, his eyes scanning the faces in the crowd. "You can call education worthless. You can even try to laugh at my degree." He paused, letting the echo of Trump's initial insult hang in the air one last time. Then, he delivered the line that would be quoted for years. A single, perfectly crafted sentence that elevated the entire confrontation from a political squabble to a profound statement on legacy and worth. "But here's the truth. Donald," he said, his gaze finally settling on his opponent with a look that was not of anger, but of something closer to pity. "When history writes about us, they won't remember the size of your buildings." He let the first half of the statement land, a pin dropping in the silent hall. "They'll remember the size of your character." The hall erupted. It wasn't just applause, it was an explosion, a spontaneous, overwhelming, and unified roar that seemed to lift the roof off the building. People stomped their feet, clapped until their palms were red, and shouted with a passion that went beyond politics. It was a deep, resonant affirmation of a fundamental truth. The cameras swung wildly, capturing faces streaked with tears, friends hugging, and strangers high-fiving. Trump slammed his hand on the podium, his mouth moving, but no sound could escape the deafening wall of noise. He was rendered utterly powerless, a silent movie actor in the middle of an opera. He looked around the room, dazed, as if he couldn't comprehend how he had so completely lost control. The narrative hadn't just shifted. It had been stolen from him. Obama, his work done, simply nodded once to the audience. He didn't need to say another word. He had taken an insult about a piece of paper and turned it into an unforgettable referendum on the soul of a leader. And in that moment, under the bright lights of the Phoenix stage, the verdict was clear. One man had built towers of glass and steel. The other had just built a monument to character that would stand long after both were gone. As the stage lights dimmed and the event officially concluded, the energy didn't dissipate. It spilled out into the brightly lit corridors of the convention center. People didn't rush for the exits. They lingered in small, buzzing clusters, still processing the raw electricity of what they had just witnessed. The air was thick with debate, reflection, and a sense of shared experience. "I came here expecting fireworks," a man in a Phoenix Suns jersey told a local news crew, his voice hoarse. "I didn't think I'd get a lesson in philosophy. That line about character, that's going to stick with me." Nearby, a young woman who had live-streamed the entire event was signing off to her followers. "Guys, I don't know what to say." It wasn't just a political win. It felt human. He reminded everyone what actually matters in the long run. Even those who had arrived as staunch Trump supporters were forced to reckon with the evening's events. One man, his red hat now held in his hands instead of on his head, spoke quietly to his wife. "I still think Trump's the guy to get things done," he admitted. "But tonight, Obama got him. He just plain got him. He never lost his cool, and he made his points stick." His wife nodded, her expression contemplative. "That story about his mother, about studying, it reminded me of my own father." The night had transcended partisan lines. Trump had started by trying to create a simple divide: the elite scholar versus the common-sense builder. But Obama had masterfully redrawn the lines entirely. The new divide was between dignity and derision, between legacy and logos, between building things and building people. In the press area, reporters were already filing their stories, the clatter of keyboards creating a frantic rhythm. The consensus was clear. The headlines would not be about policy or polls. They would be about the moment a cheap insult was transformed into a profound statement on American values. "Obama's masterclass in Phoenix," one headline read. "Character over towers." "The line that silenced Trump," read another. As the last of the crowd trickled out into the cool Arizona night, the lesson of the evening lingered like the final note of a powerful song. Trump had tried to weaponize mockery, to win by tearing down. Obama had won by building up, by validating the struggle of every student, celebrating the sacrifice of every family, and reminding a divided nation that the truest measure of strength is not how loudly you can shout, but how steadily you can stand for what you believe in. The laughter in that hall had long since faded, but the applause, and the reason for it, would echo for a long, long time.